Could you take us through, in brief compass, what it is you're proposing? We can put up what we understand you're doing, but what are you principally proposing? As I understand it, starts with a new obligation.
Sure. Well, what we're proposing is that online companies should be subject to a duty of care to keep the users of their services as safe as they can reasonably be kept. And we think that an independent regulator will be needed to hold those companies to account to compliance with that duty of care. That's it in outline. And of course, the regulator, which will need to be independent, which will need to be properly funded, will need to have sanctions available to it in case companies don't comply with their duty of care.
And as I understand it, those sanctions, at least according to the proposal, what is going to be looked at over the next 12 weeks, would include possible fines directly on directors.
Yes, that's a possibility. We want to consult on some of the proposals that we're making, and we think that the range of penalties available to the regulators should be all the way through compliance notices, through substantial fines, possibly to individual director liability, and in the most extreme of cases, to a denial of service for some of the websites concerned. And we want to make sure that we've taken account of a range of views before we settle on which sanctions should be in that list.
So what kind of fines are we looking at here? Do you have numbers that you've worked on?
Well, if you take as an example and as a comparator, the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK has the power to fine those who are in breach of the privacy and data protection regulations, and would have the power to impose fines up to 4% of the global turnover of the company concerned. Those are very substantial fines. We think something of that order may be appropriate here too.
Those are potentially very substantial fines. We had Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook come out and say, we think that it's time to have sort of an internationally coordinated regulation. Have you spoken, or has your organization spoken, with people like Mr. Zuckerberg or his representatives? Is this consistent with what they're looking for?
Well, I have spoken to Mr. Zuckerberg, and we've discussed exactly what it is the British government is proposing to do, and that I don't believe, and I don't think he does either, that we'll be the only government in the world to do this. I think that there's an acceptance on his part and the part of many other companies like Facebook that some form of regulation is now inevitable, and that they recognise that government should play a part in this. But it is important that the decisions are made by an independent regulator, and that that regulator is able to assess the systems that companies like Facebook put in place to keep their users safe. If they do what they should, then the regulator will be satisfied. If they don't, then the regulator will have penalties available to it.
So have you had any sort of concerns about tit for tat? I mean, if you're going to wind up having to issue these kind of penalties on U.S. companies, I can't imagine the U.S. is going to sit by and feel okay about that. What if they sort of do the same thing to countries operating in the U.S.?
Well, I think it's companies, wherever they are located, that will be subject to these rules. From our perspective, it's most important for us to keep the citizens of the UK safe. So those who are offering services to citizens in the UK will be subject to these rules. But we very much hope that we won't be the only country that will put in place measures like this. I'm confident that legislators in the United States will be subject to the same pressures we are subject to from those we represent, saying we want to feel safer online, we want our kids to feel safer online, and we want to deal with some of the very harmful online content that at the moment we don't feel is being controlled, when it would be controlled in almost any other environment. So I think this is something that's coming everywhere, and we want to set out what we propose to do, and I hope very much that others will be interested in what we're doing.
How do we strike the balance between keeping people safe on the one hand and actually curtailing speech that may be uncomfortable but actually is good for society?
Yeah, that is a difficult balance to strike, and one of the things that we will specifically require our regulator to do is to take full account of the protection of freedom of speech, and also the need to promote innovation, because in the online space it's very important that businesses have the opportunity to innovate. So striking that balance is always difficult. We're not looking at a system here that will enable a regulator to look at each and every individual piece of content. This is about the systems we need in place to keep people safe.